Hi everyone, thank you for joining our webinar, which is very exciting. We're going to announce the top 10 research priorities for PCOS. We will just give it a minute while everyone kind of trickles through to the group, to the call. And while you're there, if you have any questions at any point, you can pop them into the chat, or there is a Q&A box that you can use. There is also closed captions. So if you would like to translate the call into another language, or you would like to put captions on, you can do that on the little bar at the bottom of Zoom. And this webinar will be recorded and will be available on our website with a transcript at a later date as well. And the hashtag, if you would like to talk about the top 10, is hashtag JLA PCOS. So please do that. And without further ado, we'll get started. So I'll introduce myself and then I'm going to tag team the lovely people on my screen with me. So my name's Rachel. I'm a trustee of Verity, the UK PCOS charity, and I will pass over to Joe and then you can tag the next person, Joe.
Hello, everyone. My name's Jo Watson. I'm an advisor with the James Lind Alliance, and I've had the privilege of working with the team over the last 16 months or so to reach their top 10 priorities for PCOS in the UK. I'll pass over to Aled.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Rachel. It's a real pleasure to be on this call, and what an exciting project it's been to be part of, and very grateful to the team and everybody who's contributed. I'm Aled Rees. I'm an endocrinologist who works in Cardiff, and it's been my pleasure to have been the PSP lead, and I'll hand over to Sue.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks, everybody. It's good to be here. I'm Sue Channon, and I've been working with Aled and the Verity team for quite some time on various research projects, and I was the coordinator for this priority setting partnership. And I will pass over to Caroline.
Thanks, Sue. My name is Caroline Andrews, and I'm a Verity trustee since 2007, and I was diagnosed with PCOS back in 2002, and I was a member of the core group in the JLA PCOS PSP. And I think we're done there. I'll tag back to you, Rachel.
Fiona on screen.
Oh,
Fiona.
there you go. She's hiding.
Fiona.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Fiona. I'm part of the Verity team as well, and I deal with all the administration for the project.
Of which there was a lot, shall we say? Okay, right, we're going to dive straight in. We have a lot to cover, and I'm sure everyone is here for the big drum roll towards the second half of the call. So Joe, if I can I turn over to you, please, to explain what a James Lind Alliance priority setting partnership is. It is a mouthful, especially when we pair it with the acronym of PCOS. So over to you to tell us what it is, please.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. So the James Lind Alliance is a UK-based initiative. It was set up in 2004, and its infrastructure is supported by the National Institute for Health and Care Research. And the whole principle behind the methodology that the James Lind Alliance has developed is really based on giving voice to people who don't usually get much of a say in what sort of research is done in relation to various topics in health and care. So the idea is really to bring people who access services, people with lived experience of particular conditions, together with their families, their carers, their supporters, and the healthcare professionals who provide services to them, bring them together and ask them what they think is the most important questions for research to address. Ordinarily, the people who get to make those decisions by and large are researchers themselves, or funding bodies, or perhaps pharmaceutical companies or technological companies. So it's a really important way of making sure that the people who are going to be using research evidence, whether that's to inform how they work with a patient or a service user, or whether they're the recipient of the outcomes of that research evidence, it's making sure that they have a say and they get their voice heard to shape the research agenda for the future.
Thanks, Joe. And just before I kind of move on to the next bit, there's a fascinating story of how the James Lind came about.
Right.
Can you just fill us in?
Yes. Yes, of course. So James Lind was a naval medical surgeon back in the 1700s, and he noticed that scurvy was a massive problem. It was killing a lot of sailors back in the day, and there were lots of different ideas about how you could solve this particular problem. So James Lind got together a small group of sailors who were displaying features of scurvy, and he allocated them into small groups. So these small group of sailors were going to try one remedy, these small group of sailors were going to try another remedy, these small group of sailors were going to try another remedy. So essentially what he did was almost set up the first clinical trial. And what he discovered was that citrus fruits was the thing that made the difference. And so the JLA logo, which you can see in the top corner of your screen there, is based on a slice through a citrus, through a fruit, through a lemon or an orange. So that's the origin of the James Lind principle, and it's that principle of trying things out and really testing for the evidence to support an intervention that fostered the James Lind Alliance.
Amazing, thank you. And Alan, if I can turn to you. So Joe mentioned then that the PSPs bring together patients and healthcare professionals to be able to have a say in what research should be done about a condition. How important is that for PCOS in particular, and how did we get to the point where we now have a priority setting partnership for PCOS?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a critically important question, Rachel. So I think, what we have realized for some time, there was a piece of research that we did last year that looked back over the last 2 decades in the UK and shown that, first of all, that PCOS is not only is it a very common problem, but it's becoming even more common. The incidence, the number of new people being diagnosed with PCOS in the UK and indeed internationally is on the rise. So a lot more recorded diagnoses of PCOS. There are still a number of people out there who aren't being diagnosed in a timely manner, I should say, and who have lots of dissatisfaction with their care. And you will have seen that very clearly from the APBG that you've done, and the surveys that you've done on the back of that have emphasized very clearly that people aren't getting the quality of care that they need. There is a frustration from healthcare professionals, there's a frustration from patients also about a lack of a condition-specific treatment. As you will know, a lot of the treatments that we have for treating PCOS are very much symptom-directed. And I think lastly, I would sort of say that for a condition that's so common, affecting 1 in 8 or 1 in 10 of women and people living with PCOS, that's in the general population, there's a significant underinvestment historically in research compared to its disease burden. So for all those reasons, we felt that it was really important to come together and begin to address some of those problems. The international guideline was a really important advance in improving care. Many people on the call will be familiar with the fact that it's been updated in 2023. It provides robust recommendations, but a lot of those recommendations are based on fairly low quality evidence, as is recognized in the guideline. And we definitely need larger scale studies in order to improve on that evidence. So when it came to us thinking about establishing research priorities, we asked ourselves the question, well, whose problem is it? As we've heard from Joe, it's often the case that previous research objectives are set by researchers rather than people living with PCOS, or indeed healthcare professionals who are looking after people living with PCOS. So that often leads to a disconnect between what patients and healthcare professionals want to see prioritized in terms of research and the research that's actually funded. So we felt that a co-production model, namely the one that's very much embraced by the James Lind Alliance process, is absolutely vital to ensure that research is impactful and relevant, so that it really deals with problems that actually matter to people living with a condition.
Thank you. I'm going to throw it over to either yourself, Joe, or you, Alid, or Sue, or Caroline. How, does a research application, so when a researcher is putting in a grant and it references that this is a priority of a PSP, does that hold more gravitas? Is that more likely to get funding? What is the data around, I guess, that supporting that?
Shall I come in at this point? Well, yeah, I mean, the hope is very much that it makes a difference. I think funding bodies Joe's mentioned the NIHR earlier. That's a major funding body in the UK. They do take notice of PSPs when they've been done, and certainly one of the objectives now that we've got to this stage will be to let them know that we've done this, and I'm sure that we and others will be putting in applications to try and answer some of the questions that have been prioritized. So they do take it seriously, and there is some data out there to suggest that funding is more likely to happen if you've done this type of project, and there is a dedicated funding stream within NIHR that it opens itself up to applications once a PSP has been completed. So that's certainly very much the ambition to do that.
Mm. And Caroline, moving over from Verity's perspective, I know we've certainly been involved in many research applications now, because I think the patient voice in co-creating even grant applications is more important than ever before. But why was it important for Verity to have a PSP done for PCOS, and kind of how did we get to this point?
Thanks, Rachel. So we do have to say at this stage, we're actually quite blessed in the UK. We're recognised as one of the world leaders with patient integration in research, right from the co-applications all the way to the patient voice and then dissemination. So it was building on that sort of work. And one of the things as a charity we have been involved with back, and we think we worked out it was around 2012, so many years ago now, we were participants on the acne PSP. And we've really seen how vital that sort of patient voice, that patient experience was so important actually forming some of the acne research. And given it was 13 odd years ago, we've now seen that research starting to come through and take effect in society. And it's fantastic to see that there's been a real voice of patients and the professionals as well involved who are dealing with this issue day in, day out, to actually be involved in what issues affect them. So when we got the opportunity to do a JLA for PCOS, we absolutely jumped at it. And I think some of the stats around it are quite sort of enlightening. We had an all-party parliamentary group recently. Only 3% of patients felt that they were supported and informed by the healthcare provider. And similarly, quite a lot of healthcare providers feel that they don't have the information from the research. We also know from the NHS Confederation report back in 2024, £1 is invested into the economy. We get a rate investment return for £11 on women's health. So we felt it was really important to get that breadth of the complexities of patients, and they have issues across the spectrum from dermatology to psychology, as Alid mentioned the other day, all the ologies. So it's bringing all those voices together. It's a real clear signal to funders that this is an issue that needs addressing. And so we were thoroughly supportive and pleased to be involved in this moving forward.
Yeah. Right, Sue, I'm going to turn over to you. Can you talk us through, please, what was involved in this process? We started out, it feels like such a long time ago, down this journey. I know Alan's going to pop some slides up to help kind of articulate this. Yeah, over to you, please.
Okay, so we've got most of the core group on screen, but just want to mention Eleanor Coolman and Jet Hounsome in particular, who have also been part of the core group. So this is the operational group who really pushed the whole thing forward. But then and we very expertly chaired by Joe, who kept us on task. And then what we do then is we have a steering group, which is comprised of service users and healthcare professionals. And so what we do as the core group is take all that information that we pull together, and really the steering group are the people that make the decisions about what happens next. And so we had a balance of people with lived experience and healthcare professionals. And mentioning all the ologies, PCOS is blessed with a lot of ologies. So there were a significant number of healthcare professionals and also obviously the core group as well. And it was all identified through peer consultation and professional networks. And I'm sure we will do acknowledgements and thanks at the end, but the steering group have played a massive part in bringing this whole project together. So just as a general thank you to the steering group who've done a sterling job. So we first met face-to-face in September 24, and here we are 1 month after I'd hoped that we would be here, but I think that's actually in the scope of things, that's not bad. So first face-to-face meeting was in September, And then we've had monthly virtual meetings over the following year. With each PSP, you have to make a decision about what kind of things you're going to allow to be included. And we chose to go with a really broad definition of what we wanted to regard as in scope. So the questions that we would be considered. And essentially, if it was anything to do with PCOS in the UK, it was going to be counted as in scope. Other James Linds have pulled it much tighter, but we went for quite a wide definition. So we were only excluding things that didn't relate to PCOS or were more kind of internationally based. So we put out, just for anybody who's not aware of the James Lind process, there's some really good guidance on how to put this together. So we didn't dream this up. Actually, we followed the protocol from the James Lind. So if you are thinking about doing one, there is a lot of good guidance available to you. But we put together an online survey that probably many people on the call would have completed. And this was basically saying to people, what do you think are the unanswered questions around PCOS? What should research be finding out? What do we need research to do for us? And this was promoted through various social media channels and through professional networks. And that opened in January. And what the core group did, and also worked with the steering group, was to look at how and where we were getting responses from to make sure that maybe we could target areas where that were essentially underrepresented in the feedback. So that went out and closed in March. And so we had 523 respondents who came up with lots of questions, over 1,300 questions, most of which were in scope. The majority of respondents had lived experience, which was around 84%, I think it was, with lived experience. And in terms of the geography, we had responses from broad, good geographical representation, and ethnicity was something that was important. And we had an 80% people identified as white, 9% Asian, and 3.5% Black. The mean age was around 34, and 15% considered themselves to have a disability. And in the ologies, the endocrinologists came out top. So what we did then was we put all those submitted questions, the 1,300 questions, and we pulled them together into themes. And what we wanted to do was to create summary questions that represented the intent and content of those original submissions, because we couldn't put all those 1,300 questions out, and obviously a lot of them had a very similar theme. So what happened was then that we basically created 55 summary questions that we then had to look at and see whether the evidence was already out there and that those summary questions had already been answered. So we moved into the evidence check. So we've got 55 questions, and what we did was, and this was mostly Jet's work, we looked to see whether those had been answered, and here was where the international guidelines and their technical report did a sterling job for us in terms of telling us what the current literature was saying. So out of those 55 questions, we actually only, there were only 4 that were considered fully answered that were related to mental health, eating disorders, adverse pregnancy outcomes, and fertility implications of having PCOS. So we have 51 questions. And then I think Alid is going to take us through survey 2.
Thank you, Sue. So, yeah, as we heard, there were 51 then that we took to this interim prioritization survey, as it's known. So a second online survey asking respondents to identify their top 10 priorities from those summary questions. We did some tricks to make sure that the order was jiggled around a little bit for every single participant, just to make sure there was no bias involved. And we used the wonderful channels, the dissemination platform, the widespread use of all the networks that Rachel, Caroline, and all colleagues in Verity have to maximize dissemination of the survey. And this particular survey was open from July to September. Researchers who only worked as researchers without any clinical involvement were excluded from this survey to make sure that we were hearing from people who were directly involved in the care of people living with PCOS or people with PCOS themselves. And then we did a ranking exercise. So the summary questions were ranked based on the frequency with which they appeared in the respondents' top 10 selections. And similarly to survey one, we captured data and used targeted approaches to try to modify uptake from slightly harder to reach communities, for example. This time in survey two, we had 374 respondents who eventually ranked almost 3,500 questions. As we can see here, the majority of people, again, were people who had lived experience of PCOS, but we had a good sprinkling of healthcare professionals, family members, and so on. There was, again, a broad geographical representation, the size of the circles representing largely the population base of the UK, but you can see there were respondents from across the breadth of the UK. The commonest age range was, again, about 30 to 39 years. Ethnicity, again, around about 80% from who identified as white and 20% from Asian, Black, mixed or other communities. 19% of people consider themselves to have disability, and again, endocrinologists won in terms of the response rates from the healthcare practitioner role perspective. So what do we do? How do we bring questions to the workshop? So they were prioritized for the next stage if there was agreement between the two groups, between people with lived experience of PCOS and healthcare professionals. If they both said that this question was important enough to be in their particular top 25, one of the 27 that we eventually took through, they automatically went through. We then decided that there were some questions that were prioritized very highly by healthcare professionals, for example, but not by people with lived experience, or vice versa. And there were 5 in that category, which appeared in the top 20 for one group, but not the other, which were also taken forward. And then we looked at a question also that we felt as a core group and as a steering group, which was particularly important to us, which didn't quite make it particularly high in the interim prioritization survey. And that was a question around ethnicity, because we know that there's a disproportionate impact of ethnicity on PCOS, both from the risk of developing PCOS in the first instance and also because of some of the long-term outcomes. We felt that the question around how does a person's ethnicity affect their experience of seeking a diagnosis and the management of PCOS was important enough to be taken through to that final workshop. Right, I'll stop sharing there. I think, Joe, you're going to take us through what actually happened in the workshop.
Thank you, Aled. Yeah, the workshop was held last Friday, Friday the 17th of October, and it was held at the Ashton Conference Centre at Birmingham. And we brought together, I think there were about 26 participants who joined us for the workshop, and the team worked really hard to make sure that those 27 people who were involved in that final prioritization really reflected the breadth of perspectives on PCOS from both a lived experience perspective and also healthcare professional perspective. So there were healthcare professionals from a range of disciplines. There were people who were living with PCOS who had a range of challenges that they faced. Not everybody had the same sorts of symptoms or consequences of PCOS. They were from different age groups, from different ethnic backgrounds, and brought a whole range of different perspectives to the discussion. The core team was there in a supporting, organising and observing role to see what was going on. I chaired the meeting and I was supported by 2 colleagues from the James Lind Alliance who also helped with facilitating the small groups. So we set up the expectations of the day with a pack of information that went out to participants ahead of the workshop so that they knew what they were getting into and what they were going to be asked to do. But we did run through some of that at the beginning of the day. And one of the key things we'd asked participants to do was to look at those 27 questions that Aled just described and think about them carefully from their own perspective before they arrived at the workshop. So after we'd done some scene setting work, we split the participants into 3 groups, each working with one of the facilitators from the JLA. And the first small group discussion we had was really asking people to share their perspectives on the questions. And we asked them to identify which were the 3 that they thought, from a personal perspective, were the most important of the 27, and which 3, from their own perspective, they might think might gravitate towards the bottom of the list of priorities. The important thing to note is that all of them are really important, but we've got to make some distinctions. We've got to make some differences between them so that we can get to that priority setting of the top 10. And that was really useful because it gave people insight into other people's thinking, other people's experiences, other people's perspectives of PCOS. We had a little bit of a break then, and during the break, each of the facilitators worked with the questions which had been printed out wonderfully by Fiona on a set of cards and arranged them into something that was around about the order that the group had described. So they would take note of how many people thought these questions were really important, how many people thought those questions maybe were towards the bottom end of the list, where was there some disagreement, and which questions hadn't been discussed at all. We kind of laid them out in a broad-ish kind of organised way so that when the groups came back from a tea break, they spent some time then working together, listening to each other, reaching agreement, working through challenges and different perspectives to try to stretch that sort of clump of questions out into a straight line of 27 questions, which is really challenging to do because we're asking people to shift their perspectives from a very individual view on what's most important to a group view that kind of broadly takes into account that range of perspectives on PCOS. Once we'd finished that session, the facilitators took each of the rankings from the different groups and we worked out what the average was. And when we came back after lunch, we shared that with everybody who was participating in the group, and we showed them where there was similarities in the questions that the individual small groups had ranked highly, and where there was perhaps a little bit of difference, and what the average worked out to be between the 3 groups. Then we split them up again into another set of 3 groups, but with different people in them this time. So we mixed the groups up, the morning groups up, and created a different set of afternoon groups. And again, that's so that people can hear different perspectives, try to understand some of these questions from different points of view. And we asked them to work with that average ranking that we'd worked out and just presented and propose any changes that they thought as a new group might be appropriate to the sequence of questions. Once they'd finished that big discussion, we did some more work to look at the patterns across the 3 different groups and work out what the average was. And that was how we identified our top 10. And what was really fabulous was that there was quite a high degree of consensus in that final round of prioritising in the small groups. So one group got 7 of their top 10 in the final top 10, one group got 8, and one group, amazingly, never seen this happen before, got all 10 of their preferred top 10 questions in the final top 10, not necessarily in the same order, but all of 10 of the questions that they felt were most important in the final average top 10. And then we went back to everybody, brought everybody together and shared the results with them and showed them how much commonality there actually was between the 3 different groups. And then we had a great big celebration.
We did indeed, and I didn't actually know that, Jo, that one of the groups got all of the 10.
Yeah,
It's
all 10.
amazing.
Never seen that happen before, and neither have had my colleagues from the JLA either. So that was a really interesting thing to
Oh,
note from the day.
PCOS breaking more barriers
Yeah,
and setting trends. So I think without further ado, are we up to the reveal? This comes up okay?
yep, we got it.
Great. Number 10, Alid.
Yeah, so we heard in our prioritization survey, we know from international surveys that some of the consequences of androgen excess, so testosterone and related hormones, are troublesome. That's not making enough of it really, but significantly troublesome for many patients. So unwanted facial hair, acne, scalp hair loss are major problems for many people. So we're pleased to see that this made it to the top 10. So what are the effects of anti-androgen therapy on women and people living with PCOS? So drugs or perhaps other approaches as well that can block the effects of androgen or testosterone-like substance production or the effects of those. So that was important, I think, to see that in the top 10.
And I'm also very excited. Let me just say that we've got a whole lot of researchers on this call. So I hope they're very excited. Okay, next I'm going to ask Fiona. Can you read me number 9, please?
Which strategies and treatments are effective in improving fertility and pregnancy outcomes in women and people living with PCOS, including during early productive years?
Thanks. Now, if I can ask you, one of the 4 that was excluded because we have the evidence for was related to pregnancy complications, I believe. Can you just talk me through the difference in these two?
Yeah, so pregnancy, I think we felt that the evidence base was strong enough to know that women with PCOS have slightly higher risk pregnancies in terms of adverse pregnancy outcomes. There was a high level of certainty in the international guideline based on that, whether it's preterm birth or miscarriage rates or high blood pressure, diabetes, and so on. Whereas fertility is really taking a step back. We know that we've got treatments that can be very effective, but we know that subfertility can sometimes be a problem for some people, at least with PCOS. And what came through in the original questions quite strongly was a lot of people were asking, well, what if I don't want to get pregnant now, but I might want to in a few years' time? How best should I be thinking about that approach many years before I'm ready to start a family? So I think that summary question tried to encapsulate and summarize some of the original questions that we had on that and really was addressing that aspect.
Great, that's clear. Thank you. Sue, I'm going to pick on you next.
What are the effects of anti-obesity drugs on women and people living with PCOS? And I think this would be seen as very topical at the moment. Obviously, the anti-obesity drugs are many and varied out there. There's some huge inequities in availability and access. So I think this I wasn't surprised to see this arrive on the top 10. And I know that there's a lot of research in this area at the moment.
Great, thank you. Jo, can I ask you to read number 7?
Sure. What are the different subtypes of PCOS? How and why do the subtypes affect diagnosis, symptom severity, management, and long-term outcomes in women and people living with PCOS?
Fab, thank you. And Alan, we know a little bit about subtypes. There's lots of different research that has happened or pockets of research around subtypes. What don't we know that this particular research priority speaks to?
Yeah, I suppose, PCOS at the moment, as many people on the call will know, is diagnosed really by still the Rotterdam criteria, which were established, a good couple of decades ago now, and very much relies on 2 out of 3 of irregular absent periods or features of hyperandrogenism or ultrasound appearances. And you can have various combinations of those, giving you what we would see as subtypes by conventional definitions. But what we're beginning to understand a little bit more, and I think more research is going to come out on this in the next few years, is an understanding about the pathways that can end up leading to a patient having PCOS. And it's likely to be different between different people. And that's likely to affect them in some of the parameters listed here. So the severity of their symptoms might be different. how we need to think about assessing them for the risk of some of the complications that we know long term can happen in people living with PCOS, such as diabetes or risk of cardiovascular disease. It may be different for different people with PCOS. So I think this question is really getting to the fact that not everybody is the same, and trying to understand why that might be is going to be really important for the future.
Great. And I can see that Caroline and Fiona have both popped off. So I think we're having some tech issues. So I'll read number 6, which is, how can accessible interventions be designed to effectively address the mental health and psychological needs of women and people with PCOS to support well-being and optimize physical health? And I think that's a really important link between, I guess, the brain and the body, right? And the effect that they can have on each other. And a really overlooked area, I think, of PCOS around mental health and well-being.
Yeah.
Right. And Sue, can you read this wordy one, which I think spent a lot of time as a group discussing during the steering committee process?
I do apologise for some of the length of these questions. We did our best to make them as short as possible, but to ensure that they were decent summary questions, some of them are quite long. So this is about non-pharmacological therapies, so healthy eating, exercise, psychological and supplement-based approaches. So what is the effectiveness of non-pharmacological therapies in managing the clinical symptoms of PCOS compared to standard treatments such as the combined oral contraceptive pill and or metformin? So this is essentially comparing non-drugs with the kind of the pill and metformin.
Great. Just a reminder to everyone that's on the call, and we have so many, we've got over 50 people that are tuning in live to this, which is fantastic. Please do drop your questions or your thoughts as and when these pop up on your screen, because once we've finished going through the top 10, we'll come to any questions and thoughts that you might have. And really exciting as well that we have a really good mixture, about 50-50 patients, healthcare professionals and researchers on the call, which is just incredible, I think. And really, I think speaks to the ethos and the heart of the JLA process altogether, bringing everyone together. Fiona, number 4, if you will.
How does a person's ethnicity affect their experience of seeking a diagnosis and the management of PCOS?
Thank you. I think this is one that you mentioned earlier, Aled, was not ranked in the top of patients or healthcare professionals, but as a steering committee, we felt really important to bring through, and actually was ranked very highly in the workshop. Do you have any thoughts to add to this particular question, given as well, I know you've done research on prevalence in the global majority?
Yeah, I was personally pleased to see this one make the top 10 because, people from minority ethnicity backgrounds, we saw the data very clearly when we looked back at over 120,000 women with a diagnosis of PCOS compared to those not, and found that the risk, for example, if you're from an Asian background or from a Black background, is about 2.5 and 1.8 fold increased compared to those from a white background. So a diagnosis of PCOS is more likely from a minority ethnicity background, but we also know that some of the long-term complications, particularly I'm thinking around some of the cardiometabolic aspects, may be more problematic in people from a minority ethnicity background. So I think this is an important question, and I was very pleased to see this prioritized.
Likewise. Joe, can you talk us through number 3?
I can certainly read it out for you.
Yes.
How can the knowledge and clinical management skills of UK NHS healthcare providers, including GPs, be improved to better meet the needs of people living with PCOS?
I think that was a hotly discussed one throughout certainly all of the rooms that I popped into at the workshop on Saturday. Any other thoughts from people on the call?
I mean, I think, Rachel, what it speaks to is the frustration that many people have with their diagnosis experience and the management experience. Often, we've heard from lots of surveys, there's lots of data on this, that there is a real frustration about organisation of care, about knowledge. And I think that what that leads to is people needing to try and look up the knowledge themselves. and they don't always find the right information. It's a real sort of mix there, available online, for example, where you've got very reliable information as on the Verity website, but less reliable information elsewhere. So I think there's a message here to policymakers, to how we go about educating colleagues and ourselves. What is the best way of doing this so we can upskill people so they can provide patients with the right knowledge right from the outset and organise care around that.
Thank you. I'll take number 2, and Alan, I'm going to give you the honour of number 1. Okay. So number 2, PCOS is known to be associated with several health conditions, e.g. cardiovascular disease, diabetes, endometrial cancer. What are other health conditions that women and people living with PCOS potentially at risk of, and why? Example, fatigue, PMDD, endometriosis as some examples. This was one I think we spent a lot of time as a steering group just really trying to summarize all of the questions that came in of a very similar nature to this, because we obviously, unfortunately, don't live with just one condition oftentimes and may have many. Any thoughts on this one, or we'll do a drum roll over to number 1?
I mean, Sue will agree, I'm sure, that we looked at a lot of original questions that fell in this category. So it was a common original concern from the responses that we had in the original survey. Sue has mentioned that it was necessary sometimes to have a question that was broad and inclusive and therefore a little bit wordy, but we wanted to give some examples. And some of the examples that were listed were some of the commoner things that people brought up in that original survey.
Thank you. And Alid, the number 1
Drum roll.
priority.
Right.
Here we go.
Okay, so what are the optimal care pathways for women and people living with PCOS in the UK, and how can they be adequately resourced and delivered so they are all accessible to everyone with PCOS?
Thank you.
And I think, again, Rachel, that talks to some of the frustrations around the diagnostic experience and the challenges, because people often end up needing to see lots of different ologies potentially. So thinking about how we can organise care better in the UK and potentially further afield, because the results here will be relevant also to the international community, I think. Or that organisation of care is critically important.
We do have some international attendees on the webinar, which is lovely and welcome. So we've got some comments and questions in the chat. So I will just read some out. So one is just an observation from someone that remembers linking up with Verity members in the late 90s and went to a meeting that was really empowering to hear from other people, and now has 2 daughters of her own. So it's really exciting for her personally to see something like this happening, which might mean that, future generations of those living with PCOS have an easier time than what we have. And as a mum of 2 girls as well, I echo the sentiment very much. So we have a question from a researcher. So many of us who are PCOS researchers have PCOS ourselves, hence our passion to make a difference. It's really great to see the priorities so far, especially around mental health and psychological needs, which are often overlooked. Great work, everyone.
Thank you.
And we have a question from a Canadian undergraduate who is interested in doing research about the effects of stress on individuals with PCOS and how it could potentially increase the probability of being diagnosed with PCOS. Any tips about how to get into the world of PCOS research?
Well, as it happens, this week it's the Androgen Excess PCOS Society meeting. Many colleagues on the core group often attend that. I'm actually going to that. So that's a great international community that I'd very much recommend that you link up. And many Canadian researchers involved in PCOS are part of that society. So it's a group to join, and there'll be pockets of activity around the world that will touch on exactly the sort of thing that you've got in mind. What I would say in terms of the relevance of the process that we've undertaken is that we hope that the questions that made it to the top 10 for a start are very broad, are inclusive, and allow you to think about how your proposal might fit in against one of those questions. And if it doesn't, look further down the list. As Joe said at the start of the presentation, all the questions are there. And the summary questions all the way down to the 27 that were taken to the workshop, or the 51 that we considered unanswered, are very, very broad and capture, many aspects of the condition that probably relates to certain things around stress that would fit well with your work.
Great. And we have a comment from Maureen, who was on our steering committee from PCOS Vitality. Thank you for joining, Maureen. It's great to have you here. And her comment is, it's great to see the importance of psychological health being a priority to women, and glad to see the shift away from PCOS as purely a reproductive condition. So great work, everyone, and great work back to the steering committee, I think, who showed their dedication each and every month by showing up and doing the work. Another comment here. Thank you to all the work done for the JLA. I'm a PCOS researcher, and my question is on priority 5. How would we track the disease improvement with the interventions suggested? So as a reminder, priority 5, what is the effectiveness of non-pharmacological therapies, e.g. healthy eating, exercise, psychological and supplement-based approaches in managing clinical symptoms of PCOS compared to standard treatments such as combined oral contraceptive pill and or metformin?
Okay, so do you want me to take that one, maybe, Rachel?
I think you are best placed to, Aled.
Fine. So I think the importance about this exercise, to my mind, and I think Joe emphasized this in the workshop, is that we're not asking necessarily as part of the workshop for people who took part to think about how they might do the work. It's just what are the important questions. And then it's for the research community to run with those questions and design studies, whether they're clinical trials or other ways of doing this, to think about addressing that. So that's the first comment I would have. But so for comparing non-pharmacological interventions with pharmacological ones, there may be sort of clinical trials that people would want to consider designing, or I should sort of say, if you are thinking about doing those, maybe some longer term linkage of those trials, or even in epidemiological studies, trying to understand in real world data sets how people with different characteristics who are randomized to some of those groups, or maybe not randomized, how their outcomes compare across the spectrum. There is for the researchers, many people will know there is a core outcome set. So a key characteristic sort of set of outcomes that are recommended to be captured as part of any research trial in PCOS that colleagues have established a few years ago. So when it comes to designing these sort of studies, that's very helpful in terms of understanding what it is that we should be looking to capture. So those are just some immediate thoughts, but it's very much over to the research community to run with the studies and design them appropriately.
Joe.
Thanks. I just wanted to build on Alan's comment that we definitely asked the workshop participants to focus on the what, not the how of research. And it's just really to emphasize the point that these summary questions are obviously not research questions. And it may be that each of the summary questions gives rise to several very specific research questions. So it might be that there's a series of individual studies that need to be undertaken to address any individual question. Just wanted to emphasize that point, really, that the research community can look at these priorities. You will be able to access the individually submitted questions that were gathered during the consultation phase once it's published on the JLA website. If you want to go back and see more about what were the specific questions that people were asking, and that might help you to frame and think about the individual research question you might want to ask in relation to any one of the shortlisted questions. All of them will be published.
Fab, thank you. The questions are coming in thick and fast, and I'm getting alerts from my social media as well that people are discussing this, which is just fantastic. Before we move on to a couple of questions in the chat, I just wanted to ask, particularly for those of us that aren't in the world of research, how does it go from being a research topic to a grant to something tangible that patients can feel or take or experience?
Sue, do you want to take this one? I'm wondering. Very happy to chip in if you want to.
I think it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string. kind of question. It is so hard to identify one particular route, and some things come to you and they can be translated into research and then into practice very quickly, and others and this would be a really good example where we have put in applications for research that we felt would make a really significant clinical difference and the difference, lived experience difference for people, and we've not been successful. So, and that's in effect what led to doing this exercise. So it's frustrating, and if sometimes you can hit a rich seam of funding, but it's really down to the funding bodies what they want to fund, and what you have to do in all of them is to evidence the impact this is going to have for people living with a condition, in this case PCOS. And for me, if that's what's at the heart of the application, then, and that's what people living with a condition are telling you they want, then that's the thing that's important to do the research on. So sometimes you get knocked back with that, but I think if you can hand on heart say, this is important to the people who have to live with this condition, then I think you're on the right track, even if the funders don't agree. It's difficult to hold on to that position as a researcher who's maybe on short-term contracts. But that for me is really important.
Mm. Looking at the time, we've got less than 10 minutes left, but more questions than we have time for. So a couple quickly that I think I can quickly address. So someone is asking for the detail, the slides, etc. So tonight, there will be the top 10 and an article breaking down everything you've heard tonight published on the Verity website, which I will drop the link to that in the chat. So later on this evening, you can go to the Verity website. You'll be able to have all of the top 10 and the detail around the process. And then, as Joe has mentioned, everything in full, all of the questions that didn't make the top 10 and those that kind of sat behind that, the 1,300 odd original submitted questions will be available in perpetuity on the JLA website. All of which will be linked from the Verity website. So please do have a look at that. Another question is around the demographics of the workshop in person. How many people, age, etc. Curious about the representation. I'll quickly just address that. We will have a photo of many of the people that participated in the workshop, which will be on the website. So you can have a look at that for yourself. But we really made a very, very concerted effort as a core group and as a steering committee who helped recruit people also to participate in the workshop, that we had great representation, both in terms of specialty, because obviously PCOS touches all the ologies, which has been a theme for the conversation today, but also from a patient perspective and loved one perspective. So people that were either pre-menopause or post-menopause, those that were newly diagnosed, many from global majority, different symptom-based experiences. So we really were covering as much as possible. And that was really a kind of a core principle throughout the entire experience, not just for the workshop in person. So again, you can pop along to the Verity website to have a look at that. There are lots of questions that are around individual experience and treatment. So we're not going to address that today because we are talking specifically about research, but I will make a note of them, and if I can get you answers to those questions, and I will. One of the questions actually, lastly, which is, why do UK GPs always treat people with pills rather than going to the root cause of PCOS? And I'm going to ask that question because it was obviously something that came up a lot in the all of the questions that were submitted, which is around the cause of PCOS, but didn't make it to the top 10. What are we thinking?
Yeah, so I think it was interesting to see how the workshop panned out. I mean, as Joe said, it's not to dismiss, they're all important questions. The fact that it didn't quite make it to the top 10, is just the way the workshop attendees prioritized the questions that were important to them. It's not that they dismissed the importance of knowing that. Clearly it's critically important to understand in any condition what the underlying cause, what are the mechanisms by which things happen, so that we can design new treatments according to the pathways that we understand that lead to a condition. So I think, in terms of the question around why do people always get given the pill, for example, well, the pill is recommended by the international guideline based on what we have available at the moment as a first line treatment for people who've got problems, for example, with irregular periods or unwanted facial hair and so on. So I think it's just a reflection partly of the fact that we don't have good knowledge or good enough knowledge at this stage of understanding what's driving the condition. So as I said earlier, it's not that that question is not important. It's critically important, but wasn't actually prioritized to the top 10, at least on the workshop on Friday.
Thank you. And we've just got about 4 minutes left. So if I can go around the room and just get any final thoughts.
Shall I start, Rachel? Does that kick you off? My overwhelming observation of working on this PCOS priority setting partnership is what a fantastic community you've got and how engaged the community are. So I think that this is a huge milestone in terms of trying to develop more appropriate and more effective treatments for people who are living with PCOS. And I really hope that the community continues to really get behind the team and to support the team in their efforts to try to answer some of these questions. It's great having a top 10, but what we need is to really promote this top 10 to people who fund research and people who undertake research and start to get some of those answers coming in so that you can feel the difference in your lives and in your daughters' lives in the future.
Perfect. Thank you, Sue.
I think I would be saying the same. I think it's about, for me, this has been a really complex and interesting process, but in the end, this is the beginning for us, and I'm very excited by the questions. But now the work, in a sense, begins, because we need to make sure that this gets across lots of people's desks, lots of people's experience. It needs to change practice, and it may take a while to do that. But actually, I really want to see much more PCOS activity. So when we, as I think Alid said earlier on about the lack of research in PCOS, and I think what I want to do is to see a sea change in that as a result of this work. So it's only a small ambition.
Alid?
Well, I'll start off with some thank yous. I'm not going to mention individuals, but broad categories. So the core group have been fantastic. The steering group have been wonderful. The workshop attendees were, it was a pleasure to see them work collaboratively and in a very respectful manner throughout sort of Friday. But would particularly like to thank the Waterloo Foundation, who funded this project. They've been a fantastic supporter of many PCOS studies nationally and internationally, and without them, that we wouldn't have managed to get this together. So, and to echo what Sue said, really, I think this is the end of the beginning. So this is just the process to get us to the start line, and it's for us as a community now to work together to sort of try and design some studies and in order to try and address these questions and make a difference to the lives of people living with PCOS. So it's been a wonderful project I've been part of. So thanks again to everybody.
Thank you. Fiona, any words from you before I round us off?
With what the other guys have said. I deal with all the inquiries that come through on the emails, and just so many people saying, I've been to my GP and they say come back when I want to have a baby. And it's by sort of having these questions and shining a spotlight on PCOS, it shows that it's not just a condition to think about where, if and when you want to have a baby. Not everybody does, and there's so many other parts of it that have not been listened to in the past, and now we can say, actually, this is what people want now. Please listen to us, and hopefully we can sort of push forward and make some real progress in getting answers.
Right, I'll round up if I can. I think this has been a phenomenal year for PCOS generally, like bigger than ever. We had the announcement of NICE guidelines finally, Alid, which you are leading as well. So we're really looking forward to the launch of that next year, and finally people having a pathway for PCOS. We have a parliamentary inquiry published with 10 recommendations from the all-party parliamentary group, many of which I'm really delighted to see are crossovers with the top 10 research priorities. And I think the two coming together at such a close time is of huge benefit both to the APPG work, but also to the JLA PSP work as well. And I think those two will work hand in hand. And then, of course, we have a new name for the condition coming later this year as well, which is all of these stars are aligning. So I think change is on the horizon. We're so lucky to have so many wonderful stakeholders that were involved in this process over such a long period of time, and Joe for guiding us and with such grace and enthusiasm. We wouldn't have been able to get to this point without your leadership on it, and Aled and Sue and Joe, Eleanor and Jet from Cardiff University. Honestly, what an amazing team to work with. So on behalf of Verity, also just thank you all so much. And finally, for everyone that's tuned in, I hope you have found that really fascinating. Sorry if we didn't get to your questions. There was so much to cover. We will publish, as I mentioned, on the Verity website later tonight, and then we will link it out across our socials, which is at Verity PCOS on all channels. So please do take it, share it, discuss it, plan research for it, and also importantly, whether you are a healthcare professional, a researcher, or a patient, we soon have some parliamentary work going out where you'll be able to easily write a letter to your MP, let them know about the 10 research priorities, because one of the things that popped up in the parliamentary inquiry was that there is a lack of research into PCOS. So let's let them know about this as well. Thank you, everyone, for giving up your evening and talking through this, and onwards and upwards. Thanks. Bye-bye.